Thank you so
All
much.
right.
Have a great one.
You too. Thank you so much.
Of course, no, thank
Okay.
you.
Bye bye. All right.
Okay. All right. Reverend Wilson,
Yes, ma'am.
how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I am. You know what? This is a tough day. It's a tough
Yeah,
day.
it's a rough one.
It's a
Got a lot going on.
tough day. But
God is God is with us in the midst of it all.
amen.
Yeah.
So
Yep, he is. And
I believe that. I'm beginning to feel. One of my dear friends said, you haven't cried yet. I said, I'm all right. She said, no. And I'm getting close to it. I can feel it now. Oh boy.
yeah, I how you guys are, and I said, well, you do what you have to do, and you just keep pushing. I said, and that's what Santita's doing. And at some point, we stopped and say, hey, I got to pause for. Reverend Addie used to call it station identification. I didn't understand
Remember
all the time.
that.
Remember that? She said, we got to pause.
Well, I think, for me with that, it's just I've had some very, very close friends die this year. And that has been very hard. I have not
Yep.
taken the time, had the time.
To grieve.
No. Have not had a cry yet, not about that. So, and I'm just grateful that and we're on Facebook Live now, that I've had that my parents have been able to get great health care. That's a great thing. So I think my gratitude with respect to them has outweighed any and everything else. And so that's that. So
Yeah.
we move forward because that's what we have to do. And I'm grateful to you for all of your service and for you operating in the spirit of let us move on, let's move forward. We have a lot to do. The
Yeah.
work does not stop. So,
And it's like they people pass the baton in different ways. I mean, you never run again, but you run your leg of the race.
or you pick up the baton, you pick it
You
up,
pick it up and keep moving.
you pick it up. So you just got to keep on going. So that's that. So everybody, say hello to you, Linda and Andre and Dave and Michael and Janae and Lorraine. Shirley from beautiful Philadelphia, Daphne, Maria Lopez, how you doing? Everybody sending you much love. Of course, we are looking at what's happening in the Gulf today. More than 90% of from that area. And if you can imagine a city of the size and scope of New Orleans, they are without power, and they could be more or less for several weeks. They have to see. This is when you understand how important infrastructure is, everybody. Infrastructure is real, Reverend Wilson.
Oh, yeah, it is. And you really have to understand that. You just can't.
60 seconds.
Thanks.
Be clear, infrastructure is very real. It's very important. Very, very important. So, now President Biden's going to need more than $3.5 trillion because the Gulf is going to need more. It has to be rebuilt. That's where our energy comes from. So think about that, everybody.
And the thing is, you can't rebuild Baton Rouge and not deal with the counties surrounding that.
10 seconds.
Stay right there. All of it. All of it, Jeanette. You know what's going on. So everybody, think about that today.
We can change the world change the world, change the world. Oh, yes, we can change the world. We can change the world, change the world.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
War and hate to a place of love. It's not too late. Gotta save the children. We can't wait. Let's change the world. I am free.
Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show. It's Monday, August 30th, 2021. That's right. I am Santita Jackson, coming to you from WCPT, the nation's largest progressive talk radio station, and AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota, and with my morning stars on Facebook, on the Santita Jackson and Friends page. And please join us over there and like and share Michael, Ann, and Melissa, and Joyce, and Dave, and Andre, and Linda, and everybody, Carol, out there on the left coast. Everybody, please like and share. Linda, how you doing this morning? Hope you had a wonderful weekend. And of course, you can also reach me on my YouTube channel, which is the Santita Jackson Show channel. Please like and subscribe over there. And of course, stream all day on WCPT 820 and AM 950 Radio. Both of their pages are wonderful, and you will be able to hear some of the best progressive talk radio in the world from those pages, everybody. I'm Santita Jackson. It's a joy to be with you today. Call me, text me, 773-763-9278, 773-763-9278, or WCPT. You can also text me there. GWC Injury Lawyers gives you the opportunity to do that. What about Hurricane Ida, everybody? New Orleans is in the dark. They have no power. Can you imagine New Orleans? No power. We're praying for our brothers and sisters, and we're going to be talking with Hilton Kelly. Who is he? He won the Goldman Prize. What is the Goldman Prize? It is the Nobel equivalent for the environmental space. It's the Nobel Prize for environmentalism, and he's the first Black man to have won that prize. He's based in Port Arthur, Texas, but they're all connected to each other down in the Gulf, which is where our oil, so much of our energy, 90% of it, comes from that part of the country. So when they have a problem, we've got a problem. You're going to see raised gas prices and all of that. But one of the questions I have for you today is, are you ready for, just something that comes out of the blue? I mean, you don't have to wake up to electricity. You don't have to wake up to sewage running. Their sewage system is out in New Orleans. Everything doesn't have to be moving smoothly. Are you ready for that? Do you have water in your home? Do you have towelettes so that you could at least clean yourself? Are you prepared for your toilet not to work? I mean, these are the things that they're dealing with today. So when President Biden is pushing for infrastructure and really making our infrastructure what it should be, bringing it into the 21st century and beyond, this is when you see it, everybody. This is when you see it. You never measure yourself by how you are on your strongest day. It's when you're vulnerable. That's when you see your strength. Think about that. So we're going to be talking with Hilton Kelly. We're going to be talking about Kabul, because I don't know if a war, as it ends, is supposed to look like this, where we are shooting our way out. There's a lot going on, everybody. So we're going to be talking with Dr. Shanita Knighton, really walking us through how we can stay safe. If you follow her on Instagram, she's an infection preventionist, and there's so many things that she can tell us about how we need to use or not use gloves, how we need to use or not use. Well, you always need to use masks, but you need to know how. There is a lot of stuff that we're doing. You shouldn't be talking over children. Think about that. She's got a lot to share with us today on the Santita Jackson Show, and of course, we'll have good news from Reverend Jeanette Wilson Esquire. In addition to being from Rainbow Push, being a civil rights lawyer, she is also the pastor of a church. That's right. We just love Pastor Wilson. So we're going to get some good news from her today, and we're going to hear from you. I want to know what you're thinking. What do you think about Kabul? What do you think about Afghanistan? We have one day to get out of there. Will our allies help us? More than 90 of them will still be there. So what do you think about that? Call me at 773-763-9278, 773-763-9278, or just let me know what you thought of the weekend, right? I just want to hear your voices today. Everybody, sending Marnie Reeves, Dr. Marnie Reeves. It's her birthday, everybody. Send Marnie some love today. That's right. And she's about to start off with a beautiful fashion line. We cannot wait to hear as she comes to us in the future to talk about that. But wish Marnie happy birthday, Zenobia and Joyce and Dave and everybody and Samantha. That's right. It's Marnie's birthday. Give her some love today. Everybody, Chicago, it's muggy. I can feel it. It's 81 degrees. That will be our high today. Sunny. And Minneapolis, St. Paul, 82 degrees. Mostly sunny, but boy, is it muggy. The Twins will be facing off against the Tigers today, and the White Sox and the Cubs. Oh, you talk about a blowout. The White Sox 13, the Cubs 1. Oh, and the Cubs will be facing off against the Twins tomorrow. Oh my gosh, our crosstown series are always something wonderful. Well, what happened this weekend? Well, Hurricane Ida. Hurricane Ida slammed into Louisiana yesterday as a Category 4 storm, leaving at least one person dead, more than 1 million facing power outages and widespread destruction. They said that they will know what they're looking at when the sun rises because there is no power in New Orleans at all. Some people had to scramble to their roofs as the storm surged and as flash flooding overtook the levees in areas of New Orleans. And remember, everybody, this is the anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. Can you believe it? It's the anniversary. So the storm was so strong it temporarily, get this everybody, stopped the flow of the Mississippi River near the city and caused it to reverse flow. They've not seen a storm of this strength in more than 160 years. I want to know how they are making it down there. Don't you want to know? Call me, text me. Do you know anyone down there? And what would happen? You know, our Chicago River could be reversed because, in fact, it was reversed. It's an engineering miracle in order for the city to function the way it does today. Something to think about, everybody. Kabul airport comes under rocket fire as the United States Afghanistan evacuation enters the final 24 hours. Tomorrow we're supposed to be out of there. Several rockets were fired at the Kabul airport, everybody. On today, less than 48 hours before America is supposed to pull out of Afghanistan. What do you think about that? Is this the way the end of a war is supposed to look like? President Biden met the remains of 13 troops killed in Kabul in Delaware, everybody. Uh, this is called the dignified transfer of the remains of the victims of the Dover Air Force Base. And it was a somber moment. And of course, the president, being the father of a veteran himself, was understandably, visibly moved. He spoke briefly about the victims during an afternoon visit to FEMA. And we just have to continue to pray for those families of those 13 servicemen and women. No one was 40. No one was 40 years of age. Let's get to Reverend Jeanette Wilson Esquire. There's so much going on, Reverend Wilson. We pray for our brothers and sisters in New Orleans. Just a few years ago, we were in New Orleans marching for them to have the right to return. And now we see them struggling with having no power, Reverend Wilson. They have no power. And this might last throughout New Orleans in various places for weeks, they're saying, for weeks. So God bless them. I can't even imagine that happening here, but it could happen anywhere. So think about that. Reverend Wilson, what's some good news for us?
Well, I think that one of the things we should look at is the book of Ephesians, the 6th chapter, and it starts at the 10th verse. And one of the translations says, this is a fight to the finish. And it says, God is strong, and he wants you to be strong. So take everything the Master has set out for you, well-made weapons of the best materials, and put them to use so you'll be able to stand up to everything the devil throws your way. This is no weekend war that we can walk away from, forget about in a couple of hours. This is for keeps. It's a life or death fight to the finish against the devil and all of its angels. Be prepared. You're up against far more than you can handle on your own, so take all the help you can get. Carry every weapon that God has issued so that when it's all over, but the shouting, you'll still be on your feet. Truth, righteousness, peace, faith, and salvation are more than words. Learn how to apply them to your life God's word is an indispensable weapon. In the same way, prayer is essential in this ongoing warfare. Pray hard and long. Pray for your brothers and sisters. Keep your eyes open. Keep each other's spirits up so that no one falls behind or drops out. This is Paul telling us. That's where you hear that thing, in the King James Version and other translations, put on the whole armor of God, put on the helmet of salvation, the breastplate of righteousness, the sword, your feet shod with the gospel of peace. We are not preparing ourselves for this moment. And so when you hear Donnie McClurkin and you know this song, Stand, there are times when you have to just stop and get yourself focused. You don't have to be moving in a way like some people say, what are you going to do today? I'm just going to stand. I'm standing on the word of God. I'm standing on the promises of God. I am prepared for this battle because I'm putting on my uniform. I got to get ready. And when you look at the military, when they are standing at ease, it's not that they're not doing anything. They have on their little uniforms, they have on their helmets, they have their weapons in hand. They know what is about to happen. They're just standing, waiting for the directive to move forward. And we're at that moment. If you're in New Orleans, you have to really know that God is present, even in the midst of the storm. I talked to one of the students at a school in Louisiana. And, I was just checking on her. You know her, one of our push babies, Hannah Sharif. And I said, Hannah, where are you? Have you left the campus? And she said, yeah, my daddy told me to leave at night. It wasn't dark yet, but he told me to go to Mississippi because you have to move at an appointed time. So she said, I told him I got to go to class. He said, no, you're not going to have class tomorrow or the rest of the day. Move now. So you have to get ready. He said, take what you absolutely need to go forward. That ain't trying to pack up everything you have, because you can lose clothes. You're trying to protect your life. And so when I think about the people there, it's like taking care of the basic essentials. And the essentials is that you stay alive. It's not about the things that I got some new clothes. Leave them. You can get new ones. And similarly, many of us here, we're worried about health issues. Just stand. Get yourself focused and ready, knowing that God is in control of the doctors, the hospitals, everything. And he's taking us through these moments. It's part of this wheel of life, getting us to understand life isn't easy. It's a fight to the finish. And it's different for each one of us. Some people are having financial difficulties. You just stand. Put on that whole armor. Pray. Get up this morning. Get you a scripture. It may be this one. It may be a psalm. Get you a scripture. Get yourself focused. And do like a parent. You got to take your kids to school today. You got to start out like our ancestors. There's some things they did that just made absolutely great sense. They get you up. They gave you a physical breakfast. Get your child whatever you have in the house. If it's cereal or an egg, if it's cream of wheat, farina, oatmeal, get them a healthy start to the day. And then you pray that they might have a safe day. Because you won't be with them all day, but God will. God is there. You put the little mask on them. Give them some instructions about how to handle the day. And you take them, if it is possible for you, to the school door, delivering them, knowing that, God, I expect you to bring them in and bring them back out. I've done all I can do. I've fed them. I've given them a Bible, a verse, and I pray, and I touch my child with a hug and a blessing.
Amen.
And then I'm turning them over to the school system, and I'm praying for that system. You don't just throw your child and get out of here, so-and-so. No, you have to. I had to start every single day, and my mother was working every single day, but she didn't think it was unusual to pause to pray for me. And, you know, in the winter they had them stupid Xfinity bags, and they wrapped around your neck to smell like hard. Nobody would come near you, not the disease, nothing. But it kept you.
But you know, but
How about wearing this bag?
but I think what I get from you is that every day we all need to be prepared. We all need to
Oh,
be
yeah,
prepared. We
every
all need
single
to
day.
gird, and that is the good news. The thing is, you never
Yeah, we get
know.
up running out the house. They
That's
got
right.
time to read a scripture, don't have time to say a word of
Well,
prayer. My
or to even,
grandmother never
I
did
will say
anything.
this. I will
Fast
say this because
forward.
we've got to get on to Reverend Dr. Knighton. But one of the
Okay.
profound lessons that you're giving me today is that you, number one, pause before you start your day. Just
Yeah,
pause,
just pause.
pause. And even if it's a kind word to
Hmm.
someone who is in your home, in your apartment, in the homeless shelter, just start off the right way, everybody. And let's be
Hmm.
prepared because you know what?
Absolutely.
I know last weekend, the people in New Orleans did not expect that this weekend, going into uh, Labor Day weekend, that they'd be trying to figure out power. I mean, all of the power in that
And think
city
about it. It's
is
in
off.
Baton Rouge. Many of our people are in Baton Rouge. I
That's right.
talked to Reverend Mark Ellis, and
Yes.
he said, we're just hunkered down in prayer. We have no electricity, but I
Hmm.
believe we can make it. The other thing is, Santita, you and I have to believe that God can, even if he doesn't. When I think of those Hebrew boys thrown in the furnace,
Yes. Yes.
and they said, even if he doesn't, I know that he can
Hmm.
save us. And that's what we have to believe. God is here. He's present with all of us
Absolutely.
through every situation. He
Absolutely.
didn't just dump you off and leave.
Absolutely.
Sometimes it's training for us to see what God's power really means. So just stand. If
Absolutely.
I could sing, I'd sing it.
I
You've done
tell
all you
you.
can. You just
Well,
stand.
when you've done all you can, just go on and pray and say it. There you go. Pastor
That's
Jeanette
right. That's
Wilson.
right.
Pastor Jeanette Wilson, everybody stand and everybody get prepared because things come out the blue. They come out the blue. They come out the blue. They come out the blue. Let me go to you, Reverend Doctor. I'm about to make you a pastor, but you know what? Dr. Shanita Knighton, registered nurse, research scholar at Case Western Reserve University, one of the few infection preventionists in the world, is coming to us today to talk to us about how we can protect ourselves. In this time of pandemic, everyone wants to know um, how we can stay safe. At least that's what we ought to be doing. A lot of us, I think, are being very, very careless, but most of us, myself included, don't know how to adequately prepare ourselves. I was walking around with gloves, right? And I was careful not to touch my face. But I have to be honest with you, Dr. Knight, and I think because I wear makeup, that helps me with that because I just don't do that. I touch up my lipstick and that's just about it. Um, I mean, seriously, I mean, because most people put their hands on their face all day. I don't do that. At least I'm not aware of it, but I would feel it. I would see it. But there is what you walk us through every day are just these practical things that we ought to be thinking about so that we can stay safe. I follow you on Instagram, and it's very interesting how you are Dr. Nina preventionist. Dr. Nina preventionist, everybody. And she will walk you through all of these things you ought to be doing, like avoid talking over your baby. Can you explain that? I've got about 3 minutes before we go to break.
Gotcha. So there used to be this old tale or this old thing that I know my grandparents used to say. They'd be like, "Don't be talking over those kids,"
Mm-hmm.
and it used to have reference of don't have adult conversation over kids. And I was explaining to someone that even this time, like during the time of a pandemic, is even more applicable because oftentimes if you have, like, let's say a small child and you're having a conversation with an adult, you and that adult are actually standing there and you're talking, but you have that child standing in between you so you can keep an eye on the child but also be able to engage in a conversation with the adult. What's happening is droplets from your mouth as well as that person's mouth while you are talking over that child is then falling onto that child directly. And for, let's say, someone that's less than 2 years old who is not recommended to have a mask on, you're directly transferring risk directly to that child. And I remind people that COVID is not the only illness that's out there. You still got the common cold. You still have respiratory infections such as RSV. You still have other illnesses that exist. And so because of that, you want to make sure that you're not putting your child at risk by talking over your child or someone else. And I say that this is also applicable too, even in the education settings, because a child may be sitting down at their desk and it may be second nature for the teacher to actually walk up and want to say something to the child or some sort of caregiver. And I remind them to talk to a child, which is what we should be doing anyway at eye level, opposed to speaking over that child with the potential of droplets falling.
Let us.
The other thing is.
Okay. Yes, I got a minute.
Oh, no. I was just going to add just really quick, on top of the not talking over your child should also be the nature of, and I would say mindfulness, being mindful of what you do with your hands and what you do with your child's hands. It is always common for us to want to grab our child by the hand when it's time to go somewhere. And it's not to say that we shouldn't, but ask yourself, did I clean my hands before I went to go reach for my child's hands? Because 9 times out of 10, that child, which is small and still learning, probably didn't clean their hands. And that's going to be something that they're going to put inside of their mouth. It's something that they may touch food or candy with to put inside of their mouth. And so you want to make sure that you are aware of when and how you are touching your child's hands and if you clean your own.
Everybody, think about that. Do you talk over children? Think about that. Do you stand and talk over people? I think that we've become very, very cavalier about just about how we conduct ourselves, about being physically distant from each other, not socially, but physically, because many of us have gotten the shots and we feel that we've been inoculated, and you're finding that the shots, their efficacy, their effectiveness wanes over time. There's a lot that we need to be looking into, and a lot that we have got to do to protect ourselves, to protect each other, to protect our children. More of the Santita Jackson Show in just a few minutes. Dr. Knighton.
Good morning.
Girl, I got a lot of questions for you today. Oh, I mean, so many. Look, so many. But you know what? Can you walk us through? I mean, many of us are taking our kids back to school right now. If you, Joyce, I promise you I'm going to do that. Many of us, if you can just walk us through the school door today. Oh, well.
Okay.
Oh, from home to the school door. We'll be back up in about 2 minutes.
Got it.
Yeah.
So the activities, first and foremost, you want me to do it now or you want me to wait?
Because I'm up on the air, but if you want to give people a little tease, you can, because we'll be up in another minute.
So honestly, I'm visually going to go start from my head and walk them through in regards to what it would look like. Mm-hmm. So I think in order for it to make sense, then I'll probably end up waiting.
Okay.
But while we're waiting, I think the most important thing, we used to have this saying, and it was that if you fail to plan, then you plan to fail. Mm-hmm. And I don't know who quoted it, but we all know it. And I think that is very applicable in the current times that we're in. And just a reminder to individuals that if you are not seriously thinking about what do I need to start my day, where am I going, what will help to keep me safe, am I prepared with enough materials, is my child prepared with enough materials, I think those are the first fundamental things that we need to discuss. And the other piece of it is was I safe before I left the house? Meaning, was I around someone that was ill? Which honestly, a lot of us don't think about because we're too busy in our day-to-day and not realizing, the risk that we can put others in. So that's the first question. And then 2 is if everything is safe, how do I make sure that I'm protecting myself as well as protecting others when I go in public? And that's when we'll be able to start when I'm telling people about their school day or helping them to walk through their child's school day.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
A
because
lot of everything is going to start at home. And it's interesting because the speaker before me said it, and she said it best about the fact that sometimes we are rushing, and that is the risk. That is the risk factor. Us trying to rush off somewhere actually puts us at more risk. But we have a lot of questions that we really seriously need to be asking ourselves before we go out into the rest of the world. And that's, are we prepared? And that's what we need to think about when we're thinking about infection prevention and making sure that our kids are equipped with the proper tools and understand why we're asking them to do what they need to do. Practicing with our children. So it's a lot, but I'll be able to go through all of those steps and the reasons why.
absolutely. And remember, we're going to be out at 6:58, so just 6:57.
Okay.
Should be looking at that.
Okay.
But it is, when I think of these, particularly little kids, but even, teenagers, when I think about them going to
60.
school, thank you so much, Devin. That is what is concerning to me. I'm like, do they even know? Do they know how to protect themselves? Is anyone walking them through this? And I said, no, they're not. But that's why we're here. And they should be having you do seminars just all across the country so that we can know how to go into school. I mean, do you need to wipe down your desk? How does that work? And if so, how do you do it? You always have to ask permission to go to the restroom, at least back in the day when I was there. Do we need sinks in the classrooms? Do you use a bar of soap or do you need to use liquid soap? It's a lot of little stuff that I think about that. So, and yeah, it's a lot.
We can change the world, change the world, change the world. Oh, yes, we can. We can change the world. We can change the world, change the world.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
War and hate to a place of love. It's not too late. Gotta save the children. We can't wait. Let's change the world. I am breathing.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show. Going to be talking about Hurricane Ida at the top of the hour with Hilton Kelly, who's in Port Arthur, Texas. He's in the Gulf. That is where our energy comes from. They are without power in all of New Orleans today. They have no power. The sewage system is in peril. There's a lot going on, and they think that they could be in this state for weeks. Whew. And then what's happening in Kabul, we have one more day to get out of Afghanistan. Will we be able to do it? And if for those people who are left behind, how will they get out? But right now we're talking with Dr. Shanina Knighton, registered nurse, infection preventionist, research scholar at Case Western Reserve University, about how we can protect ourselves, particularly in our school community. It's a whole ecosystem. We've got children, we've got staff, including teachers and people who are in the food services, the janitorial staff. It's a whole lot of people who need to be protected. But we want to go walk into the schoolhouse today, if you will. What should parents be doing? What should students be doing? What should they be instructed to do? Dr. Knighton, where do you want to begin?
So I'll first start with saying that planning is key with everything. And we have to understand that in the current times that we're in, it is essential that you understand that if you do not lower your risk, meaning like if it's think about a seatbelt. If you don't wear a seatbelt, what is the probability that if you are in an accident that you won't be severely hurt? And so we want to lower the risk measures. And so first and foremost, when we're thinking about our children going into our school day, it starts at home. Are they adequately prepared with clean and dirty masks? If you know that they're going to be there for 6 to 8 hours of the day, are you making sure that they have a bag for their clean mask with access to clean masks? And do they also have another bag that is accessible for dirty bags should they need to change their mask? Are you adequately going through hand hygiene at home with your children? We know that only 3 to 6% of the population cleans their hands correctly. And when it comes to our kids, our children are very quick with hurrying up, sprinkling some water on their hands, even after restroom use, and will hurry up and leave out the door, and sometimes won't even dry their hands. In this current climate, it is important for you to be the simulator and ask your kids, I need to see you wash your hands so I can make sure that you are doing it with the correct techniques. If you do not practice it correctly, then you will not perform it correctly when you are in the real world. So making sure that they are constantly cleaning their hands correctly, and then once you feel like they have it down pat, making sure that you're doing periodic checks to make sure that they're keeping their techniques together. These are the same things that happen in healthcare amongst healthcare workers. So once that is done, do you understand if your child is fully educated or educated to the extent of which you're able to understand the transmission of COVID-19 or any other illness? Because again, we're coming into flu season. We have RSV, which is back. We have, respiratory infections, which are back. Colds are back, and so as a result of that, and it's also being a time where most schools will be back at full capacity, then that in itself is an increased risk. And so do you help your children to understand the risk that is associated with illness? Meaning, do they understand that they are at risk? And when I say that they are at risk, hey, my child, if you go to school, then it is a possibility that you can bring this illness back home, and mom or dad has these conditions for which this could kill us or hurt us, or grandma has these conditions. So that would be a question.
We're talking about being safe in the schoolhouse, everybody. How can we be safe? What should we be doing? Our children need a bag for clean masks and a bag for dirty masks. How long should our children wear these masks during the school day? And should they wash their hands after they have disposed of one mask and they put on another?
Absolutely. First and foremost, when even talking about the mask, I know that a lot of people, for convenience, may want their child to wear a disposable mask. I can say that there is a lack of studies that are completed about people wearing masks all day. So we know that they are effective against droplets, and they do decrease the chances of COVID-19 spreading, but we are not aware of the long-term effects of wearing disposable masks all day, as well as the fact that on the back of the actual labels themselves, the masks do have ingredients, and some of them just have not been studied in regards to us or our children wearing them all day. So if I could make a recommendation, then it would be the usage of cloth masks, making sure that those cloth masks are washed daily. When it comes down to washing the mask daily, be conscious. We're talking about baby skin. We're talking about people with sensitive skin. If you cannot clean your face in it, then you shouldn't clean your mask in it, because sometimes people can actually have skin irritation from different detergents that they're using. So the same things that may be sensitive for the rest of your body and your skin may not necessarily work for your face. And so that's something to think about when you are talking about cleaning your mask and drying it, because there is issues with dermatitis that can occur as a result of wearing the mask for prolonged periods, or it being dirty, or it being laundered in something that may have a fragrance or that just may not agree with your skin. So it is essential that, yes, you are washing your hands before and after you're putting on the mask, but it's also important the type of mask that your child is wearing. The other piece of that is the recommendation of the bag, meaning that if you suspect that your child accidentally put their dirty mask inside of the bags with their clean mask and that they are not cleaning their hands correctly, make sure that you're re-educating them on that process, but also discard, and I'm not saying discard, but make sure that you're washing all of the masks and you're starting over with fresh bags. And so that would be something that's very important. When they actually make it inside of the school setting, your child should understand what social distancing means. And so if social distancing is a requirement of the school, but yet there are opportunities or times where students may not necessarily abide by the rules, how can you teach your child to make sure that they are also, too, keeping themselves safe and following through with the protocols? The thing is we know peer pressure can be very tough. And sometimes if you have a group of students that are around and they know the rules and they are not following them, this is the time to make sure that your child understands the importance of exhibiting leadership and doing the right thing, just to make sure that they're not putting themselves at risk or putting others at risk that they may come in contact with. So I know that a lot of the things that I'm going over comes down to education. A lot of the core components of everything that we'll do is about mindfulness, and it's about education. Are they aware, and are you aware of the potential factors that may put them at risk? And even if, because one of the things that I tell my small child, I said, listen, I said, kids oftentimes won't communicate that they're sick. I say, but honey, if you see one of your friends with wet spots on their mask and they got their mask on, I said, that mean they nose running up under their mask. I said, you keep your distance away from them, I said, because you don't know what kind of sickness that they may have. I said, and you also might want to help them out just by telling the teacher. I said, maybe the teacher will find out it's allergies or something else. I said, but even still, you just help that kid potentially get a clean mask from their teacher. I said, so these are the things that you want to pay attention to, even as a kid, and then I tell my kids to pay attention to. I also tell them to pay attention to what their peers sometimes are doing with their hands. Kids sometimes cough, even with the mask on, without using etiquette. I explain to my kids that coughs and sneezes still need to be covered in your elbow, even with having a mask on. Because sometimes there is this belief that because you have on a mask, you can just cough and sneeze freely and you don't have to cover anything up. But I remind them that etiquette is still important.
Well, let me ask you this.
No, go ahead.
If they cough or sneeze while they're wearing the mask, do you dispose of the mask, or how does that work?
It will go inside of that bag until it can get washed if it's a cloth mask. If it's a disposable mask, then it would be disposed of.
Okay. So coughing, sneezing, dispose of the mask.
And more so, yeah, absolutely, yes. And definitely with sneezing. If you know, like, that's the thing. Even if you don't feel like droplets came out, droplets came out. And so, yes, that would be an appropriate time to change it.
Gloria Miller says, beware, paper and cloth are a breeding ground for microbes. What do you say to that?
She's absolutely right. But that is honestly the same thing with our mouths. So our mouths contain millions and millions of bacteria. And so something that I didn't touch upon that even is essential before someone will leave the home is their oral hygiene. So making sure that your kids adequately brush their teeth as well would be a part of that situation. In the case where children have to wear these masks at school, you want to make sure that, yes, they are changing the mask out as often as possible. The cloth can be a breeding ground for bacteria or different microbes and the growth of microbes. This is why we want to minimize the bad ones that will be growing just by making sure that we are changing them out when we need to, as well as making sure that we are cleaning our hands. Because just as she mentioned, with it being a breeding ground, moisture. So if someone is a mouth breather and their mask is moist, then that too is going to attract more bacteria and trap more bacteria. Some kids like to actually take their mask now and chew on the mask. It is essential that if you see your child chewing on the mask, you correct that behavior. And if they're doing that at school, then as an educator, then I absolutely would change it. Just because, again, they're taking bacteria from the environment as well as from their mouth, and it's now being chewed on in this mask.
We're talking with Dr. Shanina Knighton, I'm riveted by what you're saying. Registered nurse, research scholar from Case Western Reserve University, infection preventionist. We're talking about how we can get into the schoolhouse with our children. What should we be telling our children? What should we be telling our children about how they get through the school day? How do they get through the school day? How long do they wear the mask? Should they change the mask at lunchtime? Do they wear them for 2 hours, 3 hours? That depends upon the kind of mask that they have. How should you teach them? How do they clean their hands? I have so many questions for you, but just one more question about the masks. How long should they wear them?
So there is no scientific evidence that we know of that suggests, let's say, 2 hours versus 4 hours versus 6 hours, because everyone is different. So I can say that. So the recommendations that I would be giving in regards to the mask is honestly just based off of my own personal household. Mm-hmm. And that's the fact that at least while there has to be a daily change, which is recommended by the CDC. So the CDC recommends a daily change. However, my recommendation is that if it's wet, if it appears to be dirty, if you know that you are in a concentrated environment, meaning that it was super, super crowded and you had the mask on, when you leave that particular crowded environment or concentrated environment, you would want to wash your hands, remove that mask, put it in your dirty bag, and then put on a clean mask. For a new environment, that is just to decrease the chances that if for whatever reason you touch that mask, you lessened your risk of having droplets on the mask that you would then transfer to yourself.
In their physical education classes, should they wear a mask?
Physical education classes, it depends on where the class is. If they're doing physical education outside, that is well-ventilated air, the same ventilated air that we would actually be doing air exchange with in other environments. So no, I would not recommend it I would not recommend it for outside activities. If we're talking about indoor activities, it still depends upon the level of air exchange in that actual gym environment, the ability for children to be able to socially distance. There are studies that show that, people have challenges with being able to work out with the actual mask on. And so I can imagine that would be challenging for children as well. I recommend to the athletes that I consult for, make sure that if their mask is getting wet because the sweat is running down or because they're breathing through their mouth, they may require every 1 hour change or every 30-minute change. It happens. And so I just recommend to people, it depends on the type of environment that you're in. If you're in a closed-in space, let's say a gym is a small area, but there's 30 kids in there, there's no air that's flowing, meaning that there's no open window and no air that's flowing through the gym, then yes, it would be in their best interest to have on masks. But the other piece of that means that they're going to be breathing more, and there's going to definitely be more droplets that have the potential to be suspended in the air for some time. But also, too, when people work out, some people cough as a result of working out. It just comes with the exertion sometimes. And so we have to also keep that in mind as well, that every cough or sneeze that someone has is not necessarily going to be COVID. And so I just recommend to others to be kind and to also understand that we still are coming upon allergy season and that these things may not necessarily reflect COVID, and to be kind to others without assuming. I wouldn't want nobody putting that bad, what they call it, juju. I want them putting that bad juju or karma on me, telling me she's sneezing, so she must have COVID. Don't do that to people. So, I would just definitely recommend that we be aware of that as well.
What about lunchtime?
Lunchtime, making sure that you're not sitting the mask down on a surface. So being sure that it actually goes inside of your bag. So the mask, it's not appropriate for the mask to go down on the table. So if you put it inside of the bag, and you're sitting at the table, then that's a lot better opposed to you putting your mask down on the table. I've seen kids that stick it inside of their pockets and then they got to get it back out. You don't know which side was clean or dirty probably. So there's a lot of things that goes into sticking that mask in the pocket. And then on top of that, if the outside of the mask was contaminated from something that happened earlier today, you've now contaminated your hands while having to put back on that mask. So if anything, I can emphasize hand hygiene before, hand hygiene after, making sure you're keeping your mask dry, making sure that absolutely you are not wearing it more than one day. And also the other piece, and I have to tell parents this, please do not spray disinfectants on your baby's mask. You have to remember they are inhaling that stuff. And if you look at the back of the cans of certain products, they'll tell you that it's dangerous for inhalation, or it'll tell you what the chemicals are. And if you look at those chemicals, you'll see some of the other detrimental side effects and issues that they're attached to. So please do not escape it or go about it in a fast or what you think is an efficient manner. Do not spray the baby's mask with disinfectants because they'll have to put those on their face and they'll be breathing those chemicals in.
How do you wash your hands? And I mean, at the school, should it be bar soap? Should it be liquid soap? How do you wash your hands?
So I'm not going to get into the type of soap because that's an equity issue.
Okay.
So if the school can only afford like bar soap, then I'm not going to say, oh, well, you should have to absolutely use liquid or, vice versa. Mm-hmm. Because we're in a climate where people have to use what they got access to.
Okay.
But I recommend to you whether it's bar soap or liquid soap, making sure that you are washing your hands for at least 20 to 25 seconds, making sure that you are washing the webs of your hands, making sure you're getting both the front and the back, making sure that you're washing between where the thumb meets the hands, making sure that you're actually putting your fingernails together and scrubbing them in a circular motion at the palm of your hand to make sure that you're cleaning the actual fingernails. Also making sure that you do not forget your wrists. These are common areas of which are missed on the hands. It is essential that you're cleaning those areas because if you do not clean your hands correctly, then you're minimizing germs, but you're not lowering them as much as you possibly can. The other piece of it is if you have jewelry on, make sure that you're scrubbing around jewelry. If you have artificial nails or long nails, understand COVID and other germs love artificial nails. This is why they are banned inside of healthcare settings. This is why jewelry is banned inside of healthcare settings, because germs love to harbor around artificial things. They like to be stuck up under the nail bed. Get a toothbrush so you can scrub up under your fingernails. Make sure that you're cleaning around your jewelry. If you're not doing these things, just seriously understand that even if you're taking those 20 to 25 seconds to cleaning your hands, you're still harboring other potential germs.
Well, very quickly, like this is taking us away from school for a hot second. When you go out to eat, or no, let's go to takeout, okay? Because you've said this, you've mentioned this several times, and you go to the takeout window, or you go to you order your food, and you get condiments. Take me through getting takeout. I've got about 3 minutes.
Okay, so when I'm getting takeout and I'm placing my order, so I'm placing my order with the person that's at the window. The first thing that I tell them is, can you please make sure that they do not put the silverware or the ketchup, the barbecue sauce, whatever, hot sauce, whatever it is I'm getting, please make sure that none of those items are directly placed on top of my food. Do not put those items inside of the bag. And if possible, can you pack my condiments in a separate brown paper bag so that way I can then take them out and put them on my food myself? That is the first thing that I'm telling someone right after I've placed my order. Once that's been done, once I get my order, I verify that it actually has been done. So that's that with the condiments. When it comes to the handling of the food in the cart, I make sure that the person that is handling the cart, I'll even ask sometimes, like, oh, are you also the person that's going to be packing my food? Sometimes they'll say yes, sometimes they'll say no, like it's somebody else. And if they tell me it's somebody else, then I feel a little bit more comfortable. But if it's them, then at that point, they either do one or two things. People either pack the food first and your food's all packed up, and then they'll take the money, which makes me feel comfortable. Or if they've already taken my card and then now they're getting ready to pack my food, I'm looking. I'm looking to see if hand hygiene has been practiced in between the time that they were dealing with my card and dealing with that cash, the cash register, before they actually start packing my food. Because even with, let's say, a styrofoam container with a container and with them holding gloves, there comes some level of which those gloves will touch some part of the inside of the container, or touch something that's going to come in contact with your food. So you want to make sure that you're paying attention to what they're doing. And this is not just related to COVID. This is just best practices when we're talking about bacteria and other things that are potentially out here, because just as I mentioned before, your stomach can be hurting and you don't think like, oh, it's because of something that I ate earlier. But very well, it could have been just about how your food was handled, not necessarily how your food was prepared, cooked, or stored.
Wow, everybody. What do you think about that? These are things that you don't think about. Wanda, you Miss Wanda, you're saying excellent guidance. We do this every day. And she's really pulling double duty because guess what? Just in case you missed it on Friday, hey, our girl became a grandma. What about that, Dr. Knight? Right. Is here. Yay! Yay, that's right, everybody. Give her some love. Give her some love. That's right. Effie Rolf said, beneath the fingernails and thumbs, rinse and dry with clean towels. Yes, these are a lot of things that we need to know about so that we can be safe. And thank you for for pointing out the equity issue, because whatever it is that you can clean your hands with, use that. But should you rinse off the soap? Just very quickly, I got about 20 seconds.
Yes, you should rinse off the soap, and you have to rinse off the soap thoroughly. So that is very important. But on top of rinsing off the soap, people forget about the importance of making sure that you are drying your hands thoroughly. Moisture picks up germs. Please dry your hands thoroughly. Dry your hands. That is also important in addition to rinsing off all the soap.
All right, everybody. Dr. Shanina Knight, and she'll be back with us tomorrow. Let's talk about Hurricane Ida. I have a question to ask you on Facebook Live about that, because these people have no power. They have no power today. Stay right there. More of the Santita Jackson Show in just a few minutes. Dr. Knighton, that's a whole. Can we talk about that tomorrow?
Yeah, we can, because I'm going to tell you right now, like, that's one of the things that many people don't think of, or they really just don't consider when they're thinking about a natural disaster, is what's happening. And many people may not think about this, but even when, like, Houston, when it was that big hurricane in Houston a few years back, individuals, you had people that might have survived the actual storm itself, but might have died from, like, let's say, infections. Like, I'm talking about, like, there were people with, I'm talking about, like, infections. Like, it's really no way to describe it. And I'm talking about flesh-eating disease type infections, like stuff like that, as a result of being around the standing water. Because many don't think about the fact that it harbors germs, it harbors all kinds of bacteria.
Sending Hilton Kelly through.
All of that stuff is then growing inside of that standing water. We take for granted how we treat water, and I'm talking about treating water in order for us to be able to drink it. If the water fountains and just different things like that, and what those potential sources for illness. So we just don't think about some of these things. And unfortunately, when natural disasters occur and people don't have access to electricity or power, we have to remember that they also have a lack of access to sanitation. And the lack of sanitation is what leads to increases in disease, unfortunately.
Well, you know, can we talk? We need to talk about that tomorrow because, in fact, you know who wrote about that? The Honorable Elijah Muhammad, in his book "How to Eat to Live," and this was out. Please, I mean, probably before I was born. My mother was, was an adherent, and she said, the toilets don't always have to work. You have to know how to use the toilet if it does not work. There are things that you need to know how to do. You need to have, because my mother is someone who has water, canned goods, you name it. And please, I also have these, these wet towels that you have to, sometimes you use it if someone is bedridden. I have all of that because you just never know. But I want to talk about that tomorrow because I'm thinking about the people of New Orleans and really in the Gulf today. But I mean, in a city the size of New Orleans with the density, for them not to have power, no power, they can't get water, right? I mean, that's a big, 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 big deal. And they're worried about the
It is.
sewage system there. I'm like, whoa, hold on. Everybody, this is something we've got to think about. And so when President Biden is talking about infrastructure, because our infrastructure in the United States is very old, it's very old. Other countries that are developing are installing infrastructure systems that are in the 21st century. Ours is really from the end of the 19th century. I mean, America was ahead 100 years ago. That's no longer the case. So we have to think about that. Hey, all you have to do is fly into another country and see their airport and then drive from the airport into their cities. And you see how other people are trying to live. Oh, no, there's a lot of work Americans have to do. Dr. Knighton, I love you. I'm going to call you later on.
Absolutely. I love you too. And you have an awesome day. And I hope your listeners have an amazing day, an amazing week. And yes, we will get back to it soon.
I can't wait. We love you, Dr. Knighton. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Nina Preventionist, everybody. Follow her on Instagram. I know I do. I sure do. And she gives me something new and fabulous every day. Hilton Kelly, how are you?
I'm doing fine, Santita. Good morning. How are you?
It is wonderful. I am, you know what? I am moving forward. Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. What can I tell you? Keep hope alive. That's what I'm doing. Absolutely. So we're going to be talking about if you could help me to find someone in the New Orleans area, I know, please, or just someone who would understand it, and particularly disaster preparedness. My heart just went out to everybody today. I said, "Wow, how are they making it?" When the whole city is down, whoa, what is that?
Yeah, that could be tough.
And a public health hazard that would go beyond New Orleans. So, Dave Dowling, you say no power bills for everyone. Would put some economic power back into the people's pockets, wallets, purses, bank accounts, and lumps under the mattress. But remember when Texas had their power issues just a few months ago? These people they were still charged by the power companies, right, Mr. Hilton?
Yes, they were. As a matter of fact, there was some serious price gouging going on by the independent power companies here in the city of Port Arthur. Not the city of Port Arthur, but the whole state, actually. Here, Entergy supplies our power from the New Orleans area, actually. So we have a couple of independent companies, but there's some serious price gouging. People were being charged 3 times what they ordinarily would have paid within that same month. But because of the freeze, a lot of the power lines failed. They were not adequate. They were not prepared for that cold snap. And this is one reason why it's so important for renewable energy type sources such as solar and wind.
For times like these, everybody, for times like these. And so I want you to call me or text me at 773-763-9278. We're talking with Hilton Kelly. He's the recipient of the Goldman Prize. That is the Nobel for environmentalism. And he's got a lot of knowledge, and he's down there in Port Arthur, Texas, but he's in the Gulf. It's all connected down there. And we are about to see a spike in gas prices. because guess what? All of that's been shut down. When New Orleans and the Gulf comes back, America can come back. Think about that, everybody. Stay right there. Call me at 773 773 763 WCPT. Back in just a moment.
10 seconds.
We can change the world, change the world, change the world. Forget it. We can change the world, we can change the world, change the world.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
War and hate to a place of love, it's not too late. Gotta save the children, we can't wait. Let's change the world. I am green.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show. It's Monday, August 30th, 2021. I'm Santita Jackson, coming to you from WCPT, the nation's largest progressive talk radio station at AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. We're streaming on those platforms as well, on their Facebook pages, on WCPT 820 and AM 950 Radio. But I want you to meet me also on the Santita Jackson and Friends page with my morning star, Santita Jackson and Friends, and also on my YouTube channel, The Santita Jackson Show. Please meet us over there and keep it locked on these stations so that you can hear the best in progressive talk for the rest of the day. It is a joy to be with you today. Call me or text me at 773-763-9278, 773-763 WCPT. WCPT, that is GWC and G Lawyers gives you the opportunity to text there. Please do that. But I want to hear your voices today. 773-763-9278, 773-763-9278. What would you do if you had no power today? Well, the people of New Orleans, all of them, are having to ask and answer that question. We're going to be talking about Hurricane Ida. This is the worst storm to hit that region in more than 160 years. Wow. What is going on? And then, of course, what's happening in Kabul. One day before the United States is to evacuate, will we be able to get everybody out? Will we be able to get all of our troops out, all of the Americans out, all of our allies? What is going to happen if anyone is left behind? How will they get out? And where are we with the state of war? Because now we're exchanging gunfire. Is that how you end a war? Or an occupation? Let's talk about it. Let's get a couple of these headlines in, everybody. Happy birthday to Marnie. Happy birthday, happy birthday. She had a wonderful birthday celebration. One of our founding morning stars, sending her much love today. Chicago will have a high of 81 degrees. It will be sunny. Minneapolis, St. Paul, 82 degrees, mostly sunny. The Twins will be facing off against the Tigers. And guess what? Yesterday, wow, we had the Crosstown Series in Chicago. Chicago Cubs versus the White Sox. They kind of had an exchange, but boy, the White Sox went out swinging 13. Cubs won. Ow, and the Cubs will be facing off against the Twins tomorrow, everybody. Hurricane Ida slammed into Louisiana yesterday as a Category 4 storm, leaving at least one person dead and more than 1 million persons facing power outages and widespread destruction. Some people have to scramble to their roofs as the storm surged. We're going to be talking about that with Hilton Kelly in just a few minutes, praying for our brothers and sisters down in New Orleans today. In Afghanistan, the U.S. carried out a defensive airstrike yesterday in Kabul, targeting a car that contained a suspected ISIS-K suicide bomber who posed what U.S. Central Command called an imminent threat to the airport. Let's talk about that with David Swanson and Dwight McKee at the bottom of the hour. Coronavirus, another 100,000 people could die of COVID-19 in the U.S. by December if vaccination efforts and other safety measures are not fulfilled, according to Dr. Anthony Fauci. However, if some of the 80 million or so eligible unvaccinated Americans choose to get the shot, things could be less dire. The current daily average of 155,000 newly reported infections has left many hospitals deeply short-handed. We're going to talk about that because I want to know how well the vaccines work against the new variant, because they were created to combat the Alpha variant and not the Delta. Got to talk about that with all of our people. So, everybody, let's talk about what's happening in the Gulf. What's happening with Hurricane Ida? How are Americans from every particular stripe, how are they faring? And what does this mean? We have to think about that. They have not seen a storm this strong in more than 160 years. It's just stunning to think that all of New Orleans is waking up today without power. They've been without power since yesterday afternoon. No power. What does that mean? No sewage system. You don't have water. The people who were not able to go to another place. What does that mean? People who are mobile generally have money. And most people in America don't have $2,000 squirreled away for an emergency, or even $400. So most people in America, when a storm is coming, when a catastrophe is headed their way, they have to stay put. So let's talk about all of this with one of the top environmentalists in the world. Indeed, he received the most prestigious prize awarded to environmentalists in the world, the Nobel of the environmental space, the Goldman Prize, first African American male to ever receive that prize. We're so happy to welcome to the show once again Hilton Kelly, one of the top environmentalists in the world from the Community Empower and Development Association. He left Hollywood, everybody, and got back down to Texas, got back down to the Gulf, and couldn't leave. Welcome to the show, Hilton Kelly. How are you?
I'm doing great, Santita. Thank you for having me on the show this morning.
Well, you are in Port Arthur, Texas. How are you all doing down there?
We are doing fairly well here in the city of Port Arthur. I mean, we have some cloudiness, little rain as the hurricane arrived and started to come ashore, Hurricane Ida. But yet we have not received any strong winds, any damage whatsoever. But our hearts and thoughts are with the folks in New Orleans who are without power at this particular time, which we experienced that electrical power outage, during the cold snap in March.
It seems that it's really stunning. So much of our energy comes from that part of the country. Could you explain that?
Yes, well, I know Port Arthur receives its energy from a company called Entergy out of New Orleans, actually, and their system seems to be somewhat a little bit more stronger than the independent systems here in the state of Texas. In the state of Texas, you have a lot of independent electrical grid services, but yet they're not adequate enough when it comes to cold snap and heat waves. So in March, we experienced power outages almost all over West Texas, North Texas, and many people died because they did not have electrical power. Now, many times when we lose electrical power, people think, well, it's just your lights going off. But if you think about the elderly, many of them on oxygen. We have people that are on dialysis that depend on electrical power. And when that power goes out, they can't get the life-saving services from their electrical system that they need basically to survive.
And when they use generators, I understand that people have sometimes died from using their generators, not using them properly. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is correct. As a matter of fact, here in the city of Port Arthur, in our Vietnamese community, during the cold snap, we lost 5 of our residents from that community, and they were all in one family. They were all huddled together in one house, and someone put the generator in the opposite room that they were in. But of course, if you have it anywhere in the home, that carbon monoxide is a colorless, odorless gas, and it kind of filled the whole house, and everyone in that home perished from carbon monoxide poisoning. And I think about 8 years before that, during Hurricane Ike, we lost some citizens here in the city of Port Arthur due to carbon dioxide poisoning from that same type of mistake. So we have to actually learn how to prepare for these ever-increasing storms. We have to learn how to be prepared and ready for emergency when it comes to a power outage, when it comes to water. That's some of the life-saving things that we need, which is we need water, we need energy, we need food, and we have to learn to stay prepared because climate change is real. It's happening now, and it's happening every year, and it's getting more and more difficult for people to survive because of economic issues that they're starting to face. So we have a whole bunch of problems that it's time that our federal and state governments learn to deal with. And that's why we're so excited about the Green New Deal by the Biden administration and them getting back involved with the Paris Agreement.
What would the Green New Deal mean when you have a catastrophe coming? Because like wind or solar, I mean, what would that mean? Because I cannot get my mind around New Orleans, all of New Orleans, having no power today. And they don't expect to have it up by the end of the day. There's some reports that even say that they might be without power in many places in New Orleans, if not all of it, for weeks. How could that be?
Well, one of the things we have to learn is that this Green New Deal is going to help us in many ways. But we have to be proactive in implementing the Green New Deal plan and working with the people on the ground to get it implemented. The Green New Deal basically has money in it. We're talking trillions of dollars to get to communities with aging infrastructure such as sewer, such as power, the power grid, what have you. This is why it's so important that we have multiple sources of energy when it comes to electricity. Example, same thing that's happening in New Orleans now with the power outage. Well, that wind from those hurricanes are coming ashore every year, and we have to upgrade those systems, those poles that are holding up those power lines. We have to look at new ways of powering our cities, and this also means, implementing solar panels, implementing wind farms, and learning to get off of that old-style power grid, because this is why so many people are losing electricity because of broken power lines. And with the Green New Deal, it's not. We have to be more proactive. You can't implement the plan while you're having a hurricane. The hurricane has to be realized that it's coming every year. We are in a climate change crisis. It's time to upgrade the infrastructure before the hurricane. So we need to get busy. We need to get busy now with upgrading our power grid, our water source system, and also looking at ways in which we can build sustainably for all citizens, not only on the Gulf, but even in California, up north in New York, Hurricane Sandy, for instance. Everyone is starting to feel the impact of climate change. That's why it's so important we get involved now with spending that money to upgrade our infrastructure and build more resiliently across this country.
See, that's why I was going to ask you about the infrastructure bill when we're doing all of this fighting about it. Our infrastructure is quite old, is it not, Mr. Kelly?
Yes, actually, it's very old. As a matter of fact, it's more than about 120 years old, and it's crumbling from New York City to Texas all the way into California, and of course in Chicago as well, and all surrounding areas. But yet, the Biden, I believe, is on the right track with wanting to spend the necessary dollars to upgrade it, because we are basically crumbling. Bridges are crumbling, and we must repair now.
Call me, 773-763-WCPT, 773-763-9278. What would you do if you woke up in Chicago, in Minneapolis, St. Paul, in Philadelphia, in Venezuela, in Cuba? All of you are listening. Dave up in Canada. All of you are listening from all around the world. What would you do if you woke up without any power? What would you do? What would you do? How would you handle it? What happens with the hospitals? What happens as we are fighting over infrastructure in the United States? This is when you see how important it is for us to bring our infrastructure into the 21st century. We have a 19th century infrastructure for all intents and purposes. That is what we have. It got us through the 20th century, really got us into the 60s and 70s very nicely, but then you started seeing cracks in the system. So what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? And what about climate change? This is the worst storm, Hilton Kelly, that they have seen, that you have seen in your part of the country, in your part of the world, in more than 160 years. What does that mean? They said the storm just came in and it didn't just run through. The hurricane hovered for hours over Louisiana. What does that mean?
Well, basically what it means is devastation. I've been following this very closely. We're seeing buildings being torn apart. We're seeing people getting stranded on highway I-10. And, it's devastating. But what we're finding is that many vulnerable populations, meaning people of color, out of the New Orleans area, here in the Texas area, many times they can't escape the storm. They can't escape it because they don't have the means. Now, for folks that have the means to get out of the storm's ways, that's great. They hit the highway early, they get hotel rooms, but there are so many people that are struggling because of high energy costs, because of life issues because of the economic issues that we're facing in this country that can't afford to leave. And this is starting to happen every year for the last since Hurricane Katrina hit. And then shortly after Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, well, Hurricane Rita hit the city of Port Arthur here in Texas. And many people fled from New Orleans to Texas, and then they had to leave again. So we have to look at ways in which we can protect our vulnerable populations. We have to learn to look at ways in which we can create a system where people can have a safe haven to travel to. And in many cases, some people need assistance with transportation. We're talking about thousands of folks that just don't have the means to get out of harm's way. And so they're losing their lives and they're being seriously impacted economically.
Because you have to have money to be mobile. But most Americans don't have $400 or $2,000 for an emergency. We just don't have it. And then we blame and shame people for staying behind. And it's not that they were staying behind, they were left behind, they were stuck in a place that has that has an infrastructure from the end of the 19th century. What do you think about that? I mean, what steps should we be taking now? And what conversations in particular should we be having about climate change, most particularly in places of color? I mean, because look, we know that Black and brown people live in places that are highly toxic. I mean, the study after study shows that we have cancer alleys, we have cancer clusters where we live. It's not because we have a propensity to be sick. We're in places that are environmentally unsafe. And that's a conversation I don't think that we have enough, Mr. Kelly.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. I mean, many times when hurricanes hit, what you see in places like Port Arthur, Texas, Louisiana, what you see is many of your oil and gas industries flaring. And when they flare, you see these huge, huge flames coming off the top of these derricks with large amounts of sulfur dioxide, benzene coming out of those flares. Now, a lot of these gases aren't visible, but you can see the particulate matter coming from these stacks as well. And what it looks like is just a car that's belching out a lot of the carbon monoxide that it dumps out. So it's black smoke and soot being poured out. And many times when they go into shutdown mode, then the petroleum products are dumped onto the ground, many times accidentally, and the flood waters washes it all into the community. And when people are walking in that water, when they're wading in that water up to their chest, they're being exposed. They're being contaminated. And this is something we don't talk enough about. This is why it's so important that we continue to push toward upgrading our infrastructure, getting rid of old fuels, and starting to look at renewable energy. Renewable energy is a cleaner energy that we have to embrace at some particular point. Eventually, we're going to run out of the oil in the ground. Let's face it. But yet, it's creating havoc above ground. Whenever you suck all of that petroleum out of the ground, which is what you call fossil fuels, and bring it above ground, it is full of toxins that is very, very toxic to the human body. And yet, when we're waiting in that flood water, when we're without electricity, and we're smelling all of the fumes coming from those industries because they went into shutdown mode, your lungs and your bloodstream is being impacted.
What about when the waters recede? Does that leave residue in these homes?
Of course. Right there in New Orleans some years ago, I think when Katrina hit, across the bridge, I think in the Ninth Ward, I believe there was a incident where one of the tanks raised, and a lot of the raw petroleum that flowed out into the community, well, once the water receded, it was all over the people's lawns. It was in the dirt. It was embedded on the street. And many people were impacted by that. And even to this day, I believe that area is still called what you call a Superfund site because of the large amount of petroleum that leached out all over the ground.
How does that impact you in terms of your health? I have about 2-3 minutes left. 3 minutes.
Well, we all know that benzene is a known carcinogen. We all know that 1,3-butadiene is a known carcinogen. We know that sulfur dioxide impacts your respiratory system and gets into your bloodstream. Basically, it shortens your lifespan. Whenever you're breathing in large amounts of benzene, whenever you're breathing in sulfur dioxide on a daily basis, what that does is shorten your lifespan because your internal organs are being damaged. So this is one of the reasons why we fight so hard to get these industries to reduce their carbon footprint and to reduce the amount of toxins that they're dumping into the air. And this is why it's so critically important that we look at this Green New Deal and support your grassroots leaders on the ground fighting for environmental justice.
We're talking with Hilton Kelly, the recipient of the Goldman Prize, which is the Nobel for Environmentalism. Before you go, and you'll be coming back because we've got a lot of discussions going forward. You and I talked about this yesterday. We've got to talk about climate change, cancer clusters, and what we need to do to move this infrastructure bill along and to get another one behind it, because it's going to take trillions upon trillions of dollars, according to the American Society of Civil Engineers, to get America's infrastructure right where it needs to be. What should we be looking out for in New Orleans, in that region, and help us to apply the lessons that we should be learning from there to where we live all over the country?
Well, one of the things we know for certain, the world is watching. Everyone is very much familiar with the Gulf Coast and the disproportionate number of hurricanes that are coming into this area. Everyone's familiar with the fires in California. It's time for us to hold our elected officials on the federal, state, and local levels, hold them accountable. They work for us. It's time that they do the right thing and spend the money in the right places that need to be spent. No longer can we stand by and just say, well, that problem on the Gulf Coast is not my problem. Those fires in California is not my problem. Whenever you have massive fires like that in California, it just that smoke and the impact, it goes across the country. When you talk about the hurricanes in the Gulf, those hurricanes come out of that Gulf and then they streak across the country, headed most of the time to the northwest. We are all impacted. So it's up to all of us to stand up and fight and push our administrators to do the right thing, to push this administration to do what it needs to do to save the people and to get us off of this old way of doing business and get us into the 21st century when it comes to energy sources and when it comes to protecting our citizens from these storms that are constantly coming in.
Amen to that. And we're 20 years in, everybody, 21 to be exact, into the 21st century, dealing with an infrastructure from the end of the 19th century. Come on, you guys. Not only do we have to do better, we need to do right. Our very lives depend upon it. Hilton Kelly, Community Empower and Development Association, they need your support. They should get your support, and you're going to get a lot of great information about what we need to know about our environment. It might not be a sexy conversation until your lights can't come on. Think about that. Let's talk about Kabul, everybody. Hilton Kelly, sending you much love. Can't wait to have you back in a matter of days. Love it, love it, love it. More of the Santita Jackson Show in just a few minutes. Hilton Kelly?
Yes.
I cannot wait to have you back.
Well, I can't wait to come back. It's always a pleasure, and I'm very excited to be able to share some information with so many people that are in need of this information. Thank you very much.
Oh, boy, they need it. I know, please, I need it. But it's making me go back to that Elijah Muhammad book that my mother had. Because he was.
I heard that.
Oh, yeah. He was preparing everybody for the day that you might have to go off grid. And this book is like 60 years old.
Well, before it's time. Well, we definitely should regurgitate that, bring it back, and put it in the hands of the folks.
You know what? We talked about that. Because he would say, you need to have garbage bags, kitty litter, be able to spread that across the toilet, underneath, and then put the lid down, because you don't want the waste because kitty litter traps waste, and you want to do that. Oh, I mean, the book laid it out, honestly. And I think that we're in a place where we need to know that now.
Well, yeah, I mean, that definitely need to be a part of your emergency plan when it comes to bunkering down for long periods of time without electricity or water. That needs to be a part of your plan.
Well, but no one even thinks we need the plan. That's what's amazing, right? You don't think about that. We take so much for granted in the United States. We really do. And we shouldn't.
And, that's one reason why I mentioned, some folks just don't have the means.
Mm-hmm.
Many people are struggling just to pay the utility bills and keep food on the table.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't have time to go out and buy these emergency kits or to think about emergency preparedness. But nonetheless, it needs to happen. Someone has to step up to the plate and help help people understand just how important it is to be prepared because it could possibly save your life.
Absolutely. I'm sending you much love today. You'll hear from me in the next couple of days. Give that new grandbaby a kiss.
Will do. Thank you, Sam. And much love and prayers to your family.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I'm glad to let you know that both of our parents, my parents have 5 kids. They are
Sending Dwayne McKee and
improving.
David Swanson through.
Thank God. Thank God for that. Thank you. Thank you so much. God bless
You're
you.
welcome. Talk to you. God
Thank
bless.
you.
Bye-bye.
Mr. Swanson?
Good morning.
Hey, how are you? And I've got Dwight McKee, a founding member of Push. And you've got to see this documentary that, in fact, Steve Jobs' wife produced it. He's doing some wonderful work on the west side of Chicago with some of our young people who need it the most, really helping them to get parented and helping to develop them so they can be the best citizens, they can be best people they can be. And so I'm glad to have you. War is a lie. Whew. And they're shooting their way out of this one. So I can't wait for you to explain how we're going to do that. We're shooting our way out of Kabul. That's rich. Okay. I just don't know how that happens. But we'll be up in about a minute. Yeah. Oh, we're inside of a minute, right? Yep, we are.
Back in 60.
Okay. Okay. So how are you? How's your
I can't complain. Sure, I will, but better than a lot of people.
Hey, and Dwight, how was your weekend?
It was pretty fair.
All right. Well,
Good morning, Mr. Swanson. Good morning.
listen. Well, here we go. I am anxious to hear your report on this. Oh boy. Excuse me. Oh boy. Whew. It's been a minute. Get this. Okay.
10 seconds.
Okay.
We can change the world, change the world, change the world. We can change the world, we can change the world, change the world.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
War and hate to a place of love, it's not too late. Gotta save the children, we can't wait. Let's change the world.
To the Santita Jackson Show, let's talk about Kabul. Let's talk about the attack. Let's talk about the August 31st exit deadline to which the United States is expected to adhere. What do you think about that? What happens if we don't get everybody out? If we don't get all of the allies, if we don't get all of the Americans, if we don't get all of our troops out? How is that going to work? How's that going to work? We have more than 90 allies who are still there. We've got Eric Prince from formerly of Blackwater, who's charging $6,500 a seat to get out of Kabul. We've got a lot going on, and so I want to hear from you. President Biden, of course, met the remains of 13 troops killed at Kabul at the Dover Air Force Base in Delaware. There was a dignified transfer, as it's called, of the remains of these young people. Not one of them was 40 years of age, killed in the suicide attack and the subsequent shooting after the suicide attack. So, and now we see there's a report that the airport has come under rocket fire as the U.S. Afghanistan evacuation enters the final 48 hours. Indeed, President Biden swore to retaliate against those who committed the suicide bombing. So I said, I've got to find out exactly what is going on here. I need someone really, really brilliant. So I said, let me go to David Swanson, who's author, activist, journalist, even is a radio show host. And of course, he's the executive director of worldbeyondwar.org, and the campaign coordinator for rootsaction.org. And of course, Dr. D, affectionately known to this audience, one of the founders of Operation Push, active, of course, with the National Action Network, brilliant social scientist, doing such great work all over the city of Chicago with our young people. Let me start with you, David Swanson. David Swanson, what are we looking at? Is this what the end of a war, as it has been called, the end of an occupation? Is this what this is supposed to look like? Shooting our way out?
Well, the war never should have happened, and it should have been ended immediately, and it didn't have to be ended this way. But given that these wars are screwed up from the get-go to the end, it's not so shocking that it would end this way. What's interesting is that it's all over the corporate media, and suddenly, for the past week, I mean, this is the most extensive coverage this war has gotten in 20 years, and it's all about how ending it is an act of violence and cruelty. And this is a little disturbing because this is a war that has killed millions of human beings. That has been atrocity after horrific disaster after catastrophe for 20 years. And because the reason that none of the people who matter, that is Americans, were dying in recent months was because the United States, President Donald Trump had made an agreement to get out, which Joe Biden failed to keep, but is now belatedly saying he will keep. And so there were no Americans die except by suicide, which has always been the top killer of the U.S. troops involved in this disaster. Other than suicides, nobody was dying who mattered. But just as they're still to this day, just this morning, blowing up men, women, and children in the cities in Afghanistan with missiles from the sky, and they don't count, and you can't see them, and they don't matter. This has been going on for 20 years. And the U.S. public, if you look at the polls, has wanted this thing ended for over 18 years, clearly. For longer than that, depending which polls you look at. And so the Washington Post today, columnist Max Boot, blaming the U.S. public. Biden is doing what the stupid people of the United States wanted and ending this lovely, glorious war. Well, not exactly, because we didn't want it started, and we had a majority of us wanting it ended for over 18 years. And somehow this notion that, well, disaster and death are what happened when you end a war gets the whole idea of what a war is upside down and backwards. My God, it's a war. It's been killing millions of people for 20 years, blowing up children, blowing up men and women, and increasing terrorism, generating terrorism. The study that was recently published in Peace Science Digest, the number of troops that each supporting NATO member and allied country sent into Afghanistan, they generated terrorism back home in their country in direct proportion to how many troops they put in to the war on terrorism. So there's no learning lessons here, and there's clearly no interest in learning lessons here. You're doing this counterproductive so-called counterterrorism that generates terrorism and still doing it. It's just that the media is paying attention, and some of the lives being lost are the lives that matter. It's and the notion that this whole thing is for democracy and human rights and women's rights is just so disgusting. 3 days ago, the Washington Post had an article about how the threat to NATO is democracy, because the people in these stupid European countries don't want NATO fighting all these crazy wars and starting a war with China and so forth. And there's so many problems with democracy for a gang of militants, national governments led by Washington, D.C., that are supposedly fighting all of these wars for democracy.
What happened in Afghanistan? What should we understand? What did this occupation, what did this war look like, David Swanson?
Well, it looked like a crime that no one wanted prosecuted, where you had crimes including attacks on the World Trade Center in previous years had been prosecuted as crimes. There was no interest in that. There was no willingness to let the Taliban turn bin Laden over to a third country to be put on trial in a court of law. There was a desire for war, and it never made sense, and it was never supposed to make any sense because there really wasn't any interest in the war. It was a war in order to start a different war. Tony Blair wouldn't commit the UK to a war on Iraq unless they attacked Afghanistan first. So they attacked Afghanistan, no real notion of why or how or to what end, and immediately began planning their invasion of Iraq. And George W. Bush marched out and said, we don't really care about bin Laden. That doesn't matter. We're busy with the war on Iraq. You then had a guy named Barack Obama running on a pseudo anti-war platform for president, making speeches about end the war, and then whispering to the reporters, well, not really. And he started being called anti-war and ran in horror from the idea and proclaimed his love and devotion to the war on Afghanistan. Because if you were going to oppose the war in Iraq, you had to love the war on Afghanistan. So then we had, the troop levels tripled, the mercenaries quadrupled, the bombings quintupled, and the war just exploding and going on year after year after year. Now through Republican, Democrat, bipartisan harmony and lack of gridlock, as everybody supposedly longs for, but never any notion that it was going to do anyone any good. And the things that the U.S. troops were told they were fighting for, the pack of lies about nation building and democracy spreading that now Joe Biden tells them was all, a bunch of nonsense. It was a bunch of nonsense. This is not how you spread democracy or human rights. So it had to end. It should have ended sooner rather than later. And now it's ending in the most ridiculous manner with the White House promising us that thousands of endangered people will be able to leave after the deadline because they have the assurance on that of the Taliban, which they almost officially won't admit exists. They're going to pull out their embassy. They're not going to talk to the Taliban. They're so irrationally angry about, losing another war and people not appreciating having their children blown up that they're not going to talk to the Taliban. Yet they're telling us that everything will be okay because they've talked to the Taliban. I don't know how we're supposed to make sense of that.
We're talking with David Swanson, World Beyond War. I don't know how to make sense of it. I really don't, David Swanson. I don't know how to make sense of it. And I'm wondering how safe the people who are left behind will be, those people who need to get out. How will they get out? Will they be able to get out, David Swanson? The Americans who've been trying to get to Kabul, in a country that has a challenging infrastructure, to put it charitably, how will the allies get out? Will they be allowed to get out? What about the rest of our soldiers? Any thoughts?
Well, it's becoming less and less likely and more dangerous. When you blow up children and men and women and cars and houses in Kabul as well as in other parts of Afghanistan, and you promise more and you swear you will hunt people down and kill them. I mean, this is why people didn't appreciate the occupation in the first place for 20 years. This is why so many people saw the Taliban as the lesser of the two evils. And so you're not helping the situation. You're making it less likely that people will be able to leave. At the point that they wanted to finally get out, they needed to surrender and negotiate and discuss and arrange, and they won't even admit that the new government of Afghanistan exists. So how are they going to do that? It remains to be seen. And I can't tell you whether people are going to continue wanting to get out because we don't know how bad the Taliban is going to be, or whether they are going to be able to get out. But if they get out, it's going to be more than likely by air. and that's going to require that the Taliban allow the use of Kabul airport to get out. And the fact that you have dozens of countries swearing they'll help and swearing that the Taliban has said it will be okay. I mean, you're asking this commitment from a new government that you've made agreements with and broken them. That you failed to meet your deadline, you failed to stop bombing, you failed to even commit to ever stopping bombing, and you're relying on their commitment to let people get out. It seems quite dubious to me.
After we've told them we will hunt you down. Just,
Right.
boy, I don't get it. Dwight McKee, your thoughts before we go to the callers?
You also wonder, and Mr. Swanson, maybe you want to talk about this, is how much of this was about terrorism and how much this war was about a pipeline. Is that the goal of this war, seems to me, was to build that pipeline going down to take the oil down to the Gulf. And that the war was a pretext because all of the folk many of the people that promoted the war had interest in the oil fields in Afghanistan or running oil fields through Afghanistan. I'd like him to talk about that. And also, you also have to wonder how many of these people who are trying to get out of this country are trying to get out because they're afraid of the Taliban, or they're trying to get out because America bombed the hell out the country. And there's no infrastructure left. It's really one pile of rubble because of America. It's the same reason people trying to get out of New Orleans because of a hurricane is the reason I think that a lot of people want to get out of this country, because there's nothing really left of the country that existed before the war started. They bombed the country in oblivion. And now we act as if that we're doing them a favor because we're saving their lives from Taliban, when the fact of the matter is these people lost their homes, their businesses, their family, and this is their only opportunity to go.
David Swanson?
Well, there's no question. There are millions homeless. There are millions who've been homeless for years. There are millions homeless in neighboring countries like Pakistan. And this goes back to, the best times in Afghanistan in living memory are before 1979, before the time when Zbigniew Brzezinski bragged about provoking the Soviets into a war in Afghanistan that was then, involved the United States arming and supporting the exact people who are now thought of as the evildoer enemies in Afghanistan, which was followed by a civil war, which was followed by this new war for 2 decades. And I remember being in a room with Zbigniew Brzezinski some years into this war when he was already saying, do not listen to the U.S. public that wants to end this war. This was maybe 15 years ago. And him shamelessly, publicly listing that pipeline as one of the important reasons, along with bases and positioning missiles and the mineral wealth and the neighboring countries of Iran and China and the geopolitics. And of course, the big sort of momentum keeping this thing going all these years has been the profit just streaming out of it. The biggest 5 weapons companies are now getting 5 times what they were getting each year from the U.S. government before this war. The stocks of the big weapons companies have outperformed the stock market by 58%. So part of the rationale for these wars, if you can call it that, is to just create chaos and maintain endless wars and keep them going, because there are people getting rich and they are funding political campaigns in a so-called democracy. But after 20 years of this, Afghanistan was far worse off in most ways for most people, including infrastructure, including the environment. Birds don't even go to Afghanistan anymore. The place has been demolished. The forests have been demolished. It's a disaster. 3rd worst place in the world for newborn death before the Taliban came in and threatened women's rights. Right? Spousal rape legalized, and forced marriages, the vast majority of marriages, etc., before the threat to women's rights was from the Taliban. Now, the Taliban was horrific last time they were in power. They may very well prove to be horrific again. But these people were given two horrible choices, and they're still not being offered any reasonable choices. And if the foreign benevolent occupiers had spent decades funding civil society and nonviolent activists rather than a brutal drug-dealing puppet government, who knows how much better things would be. But this is a war that did not put an end to terrorism, and now terrorism might come back. The crimes of September 11 were, supported far more by Saudi Arabia than by the government of Afghanistan, and they were planned in Germany and Spain and Maryland and Oregon and Florida, and none of those places were bombed. And bombing Afghanistan took terrorist groups that were hiding in a couple of caves in the mountains and spread them into organizations across the capitals of North Africa and Asia. So this did have something to do with terrorism, but in the reverse sense of what people are supposed to imagine. It's a war that has spread terrorism through the use of the rich man's terrorism, namely war.
Let's go to Den. Den, what's on your mind today?
Hi, good morning, Santita. My name is KG on Court Day. Let me thank your dad first. How is your dad doing?
Oh, he and my mother doing well. Thank you so much.
Your father, because your father, I remember he met me at the airport. That time I was working back attendant. And I have no English at that time. And he told me hi, but I couldn't understand. I couldn't know better. So say hi to him. My name is Court Day.
Of course.
I'm going to give my second perspective about the evacuation in Kabul.
Mm-hmm.
I came from third world country, which is a country that has war. So I'm not a fan of wars,
Mm-hmm. Where are you from?
I'm from South Sudan.
Okay, okay.
So we fought war for 50 years. So
Mm-hmm.
we know what the war made. Yeah. So what happened? I'm gonna give perspective and different perspective, not evacuation. Well, before I give my opinion.
Well, actually, I only have a couple minutes. So, Dan, I want you to.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So, my thought and prayers to the families, to those who give their lives for our protection. I'm talking about the political side here. Hopefully, Biden is going to do it right, because if it's not going to be done right, this is going to affect the minorities, because it's going to affect black people, because the Republicans, they're going to be hyped and take all over the three branch of the government, presidency and House, Senate, and they're going to change the laws. When they control the political side, we know exactly what happened. And when they change the laws, that means the minority are the ones that suffer, especially the black people. So that is my opinion. Yeah. I'll make it short and brief. I'm talking about the political side.
Okay. Do you agree with do you believe that the United States needs to get out, or do you think they need to stay?
Oh yeah. I said, what? I'm not a fan of war.
Mm-hmm.
So I know I came from one actually.
Sure.
It's just the way it has been done. The way it has been done, and the way it has been done is going to affect, in the political side, it's going to affect minorities, especially black, because everything is America's a land of laws, and when the public is taking over all the power, the three branch. They change the laws. And when they change the laws, who's going to suffer the most? The black people.
Well, then let me ask you this, David Swanson. Why don't you respond to what you're hearing from him? Because he, of course, comes out of war, and he's from a place that, a lot of European powers, of which America is part, fight over these places really for their resources. What is our takeaway? Because we're a day from the official exit from Afghanistan. And yet many people are wondering, well, we can't leave. What do we do if we leave Americans behind? We can't do that. And now the president has said he wants to retaliate against the suicide bombers, and he's going to do that. And apparently they have. how can we ever get out of this?
Well, we have to get out, not just on the ground, as people in Washington, D.C. understand ending a war, but as well from the air. As long as you're blowing up cars and houses and children and men and women, you haven't ended the war, except in the understanding of the U.S. government in Washington, D.C. And it's not that hard. You just stop sending the missiles. I'm very glad to hear your parents are doing well, by the way.
Thank you.
I'm very glad to hear a caller from South Sudan, which is not just the newest country on the earth, but the youngest, right? 90% of the people in South Sudan are young, which ought to be a wonderful thing, except these are people living with war and climate disaster and disease epidemic, and have never known anything else. And the United States is not doing anything to help. World Beyond War and Rotary Club and others are working with people in South Sudan and elsewhere to train people in peace work and nonviolent and conflict resolution. But it's an uphill struggle. They've got a tough deal handed them by the world of geopolitics and border makers and country creators. And we ought to be thinking, how do we help countries that are trying to find their way? And how do we encourage more democratic countries among the poor of the world, rather than arming all the brutal thugs like Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates and on, which has got to have the Taliban thinking they can become a U.S. ally.
David Swanson, you don't hold back. Can you stay with me for a couple of minutes on Facebook Live?
Sure.
Oh, please do. David Swanson, Executive Director of World Beyond War. What would that look like? Don't act like it's not possible. Dwight McKee, you know that it's possible. You know that it's possible. Indeed, that is something Dr. King was fighting for. When Reverend Jackson ran for the presidency, that was something that he stood for. And throughout his life, I mean, his world did not begin and end with presidential runs, everybody. That's great. I think ultimately what his presidential runs showed you is how you can run on equality and justice and equity for everyone. I think that was one of the great takeaways from his campaign. But let's look at and what our lessons are. If we don't learn these lessons right now, we are going to have another war. And you know what? When you think of the people in New Orleans today, we don't have $1 trillion to give to another war. We don't have it. Our infrastructure requires not $3.5 trillion, but several times more than that, according to the American Society of Civil Engineers. We've got to rebuild our own country. Nation building, that needs to happen here. Stay right here on the Santita Jackson and Friends page so you can hear from David Swanson and Dwight McKee. We're going to be talking just for a few more minutes about a world beyond war, how we're going to get out of Afghanistan, how we're going to get out. Can't wait to talk with you tomorrow. Matthew Ho will be with us tomorrow talking about it as well, because we are less than 24 hours away from having to be all the way out of Afghanistan. That is what the Taliban told us. That's what they said. I'm Santita Jackson. Love you, everybody. God bless.
Yeah.
All the way out. They do not want us to. They said, no, you cannot stay. The answer is no. You may not stay here. Not another minute. Suppose we occupied your country, Great Britain, because you saw that. Suppose we occupied your country. Suppose we stayed. Suppose we killed your people. Suppose we did all of that. They said that. I saw that in the Common Dreams report, because you could barely find what the Taliban spokesperson said in any of the American media. I was so glad to find that, because he went through. He said, but he went through what America has done to Afghanistan. He said, but we're willing to let the past be the past from here on out. But you must leave. If you don't leave, you will create mistrust between us. You gotta go. And now we're dropping bombs because we saw a suicide bomber. How is that supposed to work, David Swanson?
Yeah. Another thing the Taliban has been saying for years is you, the U.S. government, arm the government of Saudi Arabia, and you fight wars with them, bombing innocent people with them as a partner. You defend them. You put them on human rights commissions. You celebrate and promote their government. And we intend nothing worse than what the Saudi government does. We will just cut off hands and heads as appropriate, just like they do. Perfect rule of law and good, orderly government. What's the deal? Why aren't we good enough? And you can't really give a good answer to that other than the United States should not be arming and training and supporting and funding dozens of the worst governments across the world so that it could say to the Taliban, no, we don't support governments like yours. But as there are only 2 or 3 governments like that across the globe that the United States doesn't support, the Taliban sort of has a case. And here we are staring at a disaster in New Orleans so reminiscent of Katrina some 16 years ago, when we were busy opposing this exact same war and another war that came out of it. And now we're in this age where the horrific crimes of George W. Bush are supposed to be back in fashion. This guy's been rehabilitated. He's an artist. He's a good humanitarian. And yet you can't help but stop and think, as you said a minute ago, what if we were trying to save lives rather than eliminate them? What if we were trying to address the crises that are creating these so-called natural disasters rather than generating more of them through this ongoing madness? And what if we had a different approach for 20 years? As I said on your show last time I was on, what if anybody had listened to Congresswoman Barbara Lee 20 years ago?
What if? A lot of people would still be alive.
A lot of people, millions and millions of people.
Do we have any sense of does the American public have any sense of what happened, what we did there? Do you get that sense?
Oh, absolutely not. No. I mean, the U.S., there have been polls of the U.S. public in recent years about deaths in these wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and people think the majority or half of the deaths have been U.S. troops, where they've been, less than 1%. People have absolutely no idea that these have been one-sided slaughters of men, women, and children. They have no idea that that's illegal, that it isn't legal to go and attack another country. They can't understand why it isn't reasonable to ask to stay a couple more weeks and use the airport after committing horrific crimes for 20 years. If I came over to your house for dinner, Santita, and then I asked, can I stay for a few months, and do you mind if I blow up certain rooms very carefully? I won't damage the other rooms. You'd think I was crazy, right?
Yes.
And yet this is perfectly normal, according to the U.S. public, for the U.S. government to behave this way. We're the indispensable nation, the nation that bombs for women's rights. There ought to be gratitude, and there's resentment. The polls of the U.S. public show bitter resentment that Iraqis and Afghans and Libyans, don't appreciate, aren't grateful, and there's even a desire in certain quarters leaning to the right in U.S. politics to get out of the wars because the people aren't grateful. And when people on the left start saying, bring the war dollars home, spend the war dollars on us here at home, you have the libertarians screaming how selfish, how self-centered, how American-centered you won't. These people are as worthy of our bombs as anyone else. We have to bomb them because they're as good and noble as anyone else. You're so bigoted, and which is just insane, of course, because the money being wasted on bombing these people is enough to transform the United States and the rest of the world and have buckets left over, try to figure out what to do with it. So we don't have to say, and we shouldn't say, bring the war dollars home. We should say, put the war dollars into peace and prosperity.
And we need it. I mean, Dwight, look at New Orleans is out of power today. And much of New Orleans, according to some press reports, will be out of power for weeks because our infrastructure is so
When
old.
the Lord talked about turning your swords in the
Plowshares.
plow,
Mm-hmm.
he was really talking about how you convert a war economy into a peace economy.
Mm-hmm.
And a peace economy brings so much more value to the society than a war economy. Though there are few people who really profit tremendously off a war economy. So there are benefits to having a war economy, but only for those who make the swords. And only for those who bury the dead and make the prosthetics and seize assets. It's far more democratic and far more egalitarian for those when you have a peace economy where everybody eats and everybody fellowships and everybody has value. This is a crime before humanity. My concern, David, is that the real criminals would never be prosecuted. In fact, they'll be glorified as heroes. How do we get them in? What happens in the World Court of Public Opinion or the World Court of, like they had in Germany after the war? How do you get these guys tried and convicted for war crimes, or is that possible?
Well, there is a World Court of Justice and there is an International Criminal Court. The problem is that they are under the thumb of the United States and four of the other biggest weapons dealers and war makers on the earth, the five permanent members of the UN Security Council. So the United Nations is not a democratic enterprise. It's not spreading democracy with its arms and its troops democratically. It's doing so under the veto power and the agenda control of these five countries. And so the International Criminal Court, which the United States is not a party to, opposes and threatens repercussions against other nations for supporting, and which has thus far prosecuted exclusively Africans, was investigating, had an investigation of all the crimes in Afghanistan, including those of the Taliban, including those of the Afghan government, but also including those of the United States and all of its junior allies and sidekicks. And the United States put a stop to that. And so if you're going to proclaim that you're upholding the rule of law, and that you're committing the worst possible crimes, what was called at Nuremberg the supreme international crime that encompasses all others, well, then you're shooting yourself in the foot, literally and figuratively. If you're going to support the rule of law, support the rule of law. The United States is the biggest holdout on international human rights treaties in the world, has a horrible record on human rights and arms and supports all of the governments across the world, with a couple of exceptions, that have the very worst records on human rights. So, we have to support those nations around the world that are supporting the International Criminal Court and the World Court and the idea of the rule of law and the idea that national courts in nations that have the nerve can use universal jurisdiction to prosecute crimes that aren't being prosecuted by the relevant countries. Someone like Samantha Power celebrating on Twitter when a new country joins the International Criminal Court. Somebody has to ask her, when is your country going to join the International Criminal Court? Because otherwise the war criminals are celebrated and paraded on television and asked for their analysis 20 years later of the crimes they committed. And, the next time I see Eric Prince, he won't be profiting off the misery in Kabul. He'll be speaking here at the University of Virginia, where they think he's a great, guest lecturer to pay for his words of wisdom. These people are not even shamed or ostracized. They're celebrated.
And yet, David Maciosha pointed out that when Reverend Jackson came out against the invasion of Iraq in 2001, then Senator Joe Lieberman, had put on a list could not speak at major universities across the country, which of course is designed to starve you out, right? This is terrible. It's terrible. I mean, Reverend Jackson survived it, but it's what they do, and they continue to do that. I mean, it's got to stop because this is not helping us. I mean, because I do get the sense that many of our troops came back disillusioned about the mission. I mean, do you get
Oh my
that sense, David Swanson?
When you talk to Matt Ho, he will tell you personally and from study of and intimate knowledge of many other examples of the incredible disillusion and moral guilt and mental trauma, as well as brain injury and physical trauma, and the incredible toll of suicides, which have been, far and away the top killer and significantly higher among those back from these wars than among the general population, same age, same gender, et cetera. I mean, still are to this day for living veterans of World War II, a war that everybody celebrates and glorifies beyond all recognition. The men who are still alive from having participated in that wonderful murder fest still commit suicide at a much greater rate than other men their age in the United States. And so there is a problem with these wars that has nothing to do with how the U.S. public welcomes the veterans back. I mean, we've got special parking places, get first on the airplanes. Thank you for your service endlessly. There couldn't be more. We're paying our tax dollars to celebrate the veterans and the troops before sports events and pretending it's the sports leagues voluntarily doing it. And yet they're committing suicide. And yet when they end the war, their commanders all feel that they have to invent make-believe justifications for how the war did some good to try to comfort these people. So there's no question that people went into this thinking one thing and came out realizing something else. And national governments around the world ought to have had the same experience, except that they aren't human beings. They're institutions. They ought not to be lining up to participate in threatening a war on China. They ought to be asking themselves, what did we get out of joining in and legitimizing a war on Afghanistan?
Dwight?
He hit that out the park, and it's all for the benefit of a few people. And there, the residual is beyond suicide, David. It's also the residuals in our children who come back on with these opioid diseases that was part of this war effort. Is that Afghanistan is the leading exporter of opium in the world, and all that opium ended over here in the suburbs and the farmlands of this country. So we got 1 million of our children who are on drugs as a direct and indirect result of this war. It's the money that was spent on this war that didn't go for infrastructure and didn't go for environmental causes. And now you see California burning down. You see New Orleans underwater. You see Connecticut and New York have just come from underwater. You see all of these environmental crises in this country and around the world, but money that was not invested in infrastructure and climate control. The residual is on the bottom of the economy is proportional to the benefits that go to the top of the country. It is just disproportional in terms of what it represents in terms of good and bad, who suffers from the bad and who benefits from the good is a tragedy for the whole world. Because when you think about it, if you use those resources for good, how much good could be done? How much could have been invested in Haiti so that they could be guarded against these hurricanes? How much could have been invested in Cuba so they don't have these crises down there every year? When you think of how much good could have been done, the world court won't judge this. God is going to judge this. There's going to be a lot of folk go to hell because of what they've done.
Well, I mean, in taking care of Haiti and the Caribbean, which is what basically the Gulf and Florida are, of which they are a part. If we help them with hurricanes, we help ourselves with hurricanes. I mean, we really, I mean, our oil is offline now in the Gulf. They said this is the worst storm that they have seen in 165 years. We can't afford this. And the only people who really benefited, David Swanson, Raytheon, I mean, all the big military contractors, they're the ones who won. We didn't win. What's the path forward, David Swanson?
Absolutely right. As Jeanette Rankin said, a century ago, you can no more win a war than a hurricane. These things are not won. There was never any vision of what winning would mean. The purpose of the war was the war. And you could take 3% of just U.S. military spending and end starvation on Earth. You could take 1.5% and end the lack of clean drinking water on Earth. You could take 10 or 20% and put more into going after the destruction of the climate than the biggest environmental groups ever dare to dream of. Meanwhile, you have this upcoming global conference on the climate where they will continue, unless people compel them otherwise, to leave militaries out of climate agreements, despite their major role in climate destruction, because everybody just agrees militaries are more important than the habitability of the earth. And so you look back in the 1 year in which Afghanistan was not the leading supplier of opium to the world. In fact, it had virtually vanished as a supplier of opium, was 2001. And so you had a war and you brought it back. And the war is great for supply and it's great for demand when it comes to drug addiction because it creates such misery even back in the country that's launching the distant wars. And I don't think the problem is that people don't learn the lessons. I don't think they want to learn the lessons. We've been watching for a year and a half the obvious fact that you have to treat a disease pandemic globally, that we're all in it together, that if you just treat it in certain places, it's going to mutate and change in those other places and come back and bite you. It's not that they're too stupid to learn. It's that they really don't care. The profits of the drug companies and the headlines of the day, rather than of history, are just too important to them. And human life is just not a matter of interest. It has to be. It has to be certain lives that make certain headlines, and then the pretense is put on of caring, and the visits are made to Dover Air Force Base, where at least now they let cameras in. Remember, times during this war when they wouldn't. Yeah. But there's just no prioritization of saving lives over the incredible importance of taking them away.
And the drug companies buy the commercials that feed the television stations and the radio stations and create the narrative. And so there's no accident that the mainstream media rah-rahs all these wars, because they get an ancillary benefit themselves from this. This is controlled chaos, systematic chaos, design chaos that takes people's lives, destroy people's lives, benefit from that destruction, and make us smile and like it.
Well, I think we need to question who owns the media. We need to really look at that and understand why we get the messages that we do. And I think that you need to stand up and make some decisions about what you're going to take. Because the fact is, it's your children, it's your husbands, it's your wives, it's your loved ones, it's your friends, it's your cousins who go and fight who go and occupy these countries and commit these atrocities. Uh, and it's just for the rich. These are rich men and women's wars. That's what they are. And it's just a shame. It's a shame. And it is beneath our dignity as human beings. You ought to be tired of it. You ought to be tired of it, and you need to stop. We need to stop. We're the ones who have to stop this. We're the only ones who can. Because everybody saw Jacobin headline. Oh, the media were in love with Joe Biden until he ended a war. Now he can't do anything right. I mean, David, you see that, right?
They aren't even giving him the finally presidential thing that they gave Trump when he started bombing people, even though he's swearing to hunt them down and he's blowing them up. Civilians and children, he's blowing them up in little bits and pieces, and they aren't even declaring him finally presidential because he's, it's supposedly part of ending a war. And you have some brave Congress members, such as, the standards are, saying that's right, we actually have to end the war, we should be ending it better, et cetera. But I haven't found to this day a single member of Congress willing to commit to voting no on increasing the military spending. You would think when ending a war, military spending would go down. They've got billions of dollars dedicated to handing over to the Afghan army that doesn't exist. What about that money? And they're talking about everything they're talking about in Congress is increasing the military spending. Even Congresswoman Barbara Lee, who's the only one who got this right 20 years ago, she and Congressman Pocan have sent a letter or a drafting to send a letter to the chair of the House Armed so-called Services Committee saying go with Joe Biden's military spending amount, not something higher than that. Where Joe Biden's is crazier than Trump's, higher than Trump's, and the one thing they're changing, the one thing the Republicans wouldn't do that we got in the Democrats and they're going to do is they're going to add women to the military draft. Mm-hmm. We're now in some future war, people are going to wake up and say, how did women get added into the draft? Like, man, when did this happen? Well, on Wednesday, 2 days from now, that committee, House Armed Services Committee, is going to have a vote on whether to end draft registration or add women to it. Because it's a feminist issue. It's discriminating against women, not to force them against their will to go and kill and die for the profits of General Dynamics, right? The Republicans wouldn't do it. They're a bunch of knuckle-dragging sexists who don't think women are up to the job. But the Democrats, they're progressives. They're going to force your daughters, your nieces, your granddaughters to go and kill and die along with men. And don't fall for this notion that the draft is an anti-war measure. The draft, we've had dozens of wars with drafts. The last time we had a draft and the big anti-draft demonstrations was a war that killed far more people than any war since. I'm talking about Vietnam. So the generals all want the draft and they all want women in it. And there's hardly a peep against it from anywhere. And the National Organization for Women is in favor of it.
Why do they want women? Why do the generals want women in this?
More bodies, more people, more militarism, a bigger army. China spends 14%, the U.S. and its allies, but it's got a bigger army, more troops. Some of them are out there planting trees. They haven't, started a war in God knows how many decades, but they got a bigger army. And the United States wants to be the best country on earth and wants to have the biggest army. You can't do that without a draft, and you can't do it with just men and women. And even more than that, I think the motivation is because it's sexist and because the United States Supreme Court has said it's discrimination. So you have to either get rid of draft registration, as many civilized countries have done, or you need to add women to it because it's discriminating against them not to commit this atrocity upon them.
Well, I want to get some final remarks from you, Dwight, and then you, David Swanson. Dwight?
And part of that, Dave, is, and you would bring it today, I really loved on the show with you, is that a lot of these little farm boys are now rethinking this whole John Wayne notion of what it's like to be a great American. And they're seeing through this hypocrisy. And so they're not joining the army the same way they did after 9/11 when they thought that they were protecting the United States from terrorism and preserving the world for democracy. They're beginning to see through this. And so that pool is much more narrow than it was 20 years ago. And so they have to put the draft back into play because they don't have those same options that they had. Because people are becoming much more sophisticated. And they're reading books like your book that gives them the whole deal behind what this is really about. And they see guys who went to high school with them or their uncles come back in with one leg or one arm or 5 fingers. And it's not as appealing to them anymore. We try to glorify it by putting together a paraplegic Olympic, and put them on television and put great music behind them and the flag. But once that flag stops waving, it's still a guy who has lost his leg for a cause that he don't really quite understand. And so the new draft is part of that exercise because unless they invoke a new draft, they'll have a deficiency of volunteers this time around.
David Swanson, your closing thoughts? Boy, I have loved listening to you all today. Ooh.
Well, I appreciate your show very much, and I hope people will bear in mind that as members of the U.S. public, we wanted this thing in Afghanistan ended greater than 18 years ago, and we were right. And it almost certainly would have ended better had it ended sooner. So don't get turned off on the idea of democracy just because they use it as the excuse in their rhetoric for all of these wars and crimes. Democracy would have prevented most of these wars. That if we had to have a public vote, as they almost created back in the 1930s, before you could start a war, we wouldn't have a lot of these wars. And if you had to have that vote again, and you had the chance to end the thing every 6 months, none of these wars would last more than 6 months. So, don't buy this idea that it's our fault. If this government answered to us, we would be better off, not worse off. So democracy is a good thing that we ought to work for, and we ought to try to establish, and maybe establish first and foremost here where we live, not somewhere else through bombs and bullets.
Did you say establish it here first? Yeah, that's it.
My idea.
Well, look, I'm with you. I mean, look, we're trying to fight for the right to vote and the means to do it. Think about that, everybody.
Yeah.
Think about that. Think about what the Taliban said when we said we'd like a couple more days or we'd like enough time to get everybody out. They said, oh, no, absolutely not. You will be in violation of us. There will be consequences, they said, if you stay beyond the appointed date, August 31st. You've killed us. You've bombed us. We want you out. We want you gone. And we're willing to let the past be the past. That's what they said in that statement. We're willing to move on from here, but you've got to get out of here. And they have the right to say that. They have the right to want that. They have the right to their country. We got the British out of here in the United States. We understand occupation. We understand that. You need to understand that. And we need to have as much compassion for the people of Afghanistan as we do for our own, because we're all one and the same, one human family. We're about to have a lot of Afghan neighbors, brothers and sisters, very, very shortly. I wonder how they're going to fare when they see the United States, when they learn some things. It'll be very interesting. It's going to be a very interesting journey that we continue to be on. That a lot of the people who we hurt become citizens. That's interesting. It's interesting. Only God could do something like this. That said, David Swanson, you are a gift. You know, your books, your activism, hosting radio. You're grateful for my show. I'm grateful for everything that you do. A World Beyond War. .org, everybody. We need that. And I just want to thank you. I want to thank you for all the work that you do, and just for putting it all on the line to help to make us better people. Dwight McKee, you've been working to that end all of your life, all of your life. When you joined Reverend Jackson and Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King as a teenager, 13 or 14 years of age, because you just wanted to be free. More than that, you wanted justice for everybody all over the world. Thank you for all the work that you do and have done. Thank you. But I just thank you all. And thank you for this enlightening conversation. And I thank WCPT and AM 950 Radio for providing the platform for us to get this message out. And everybody, please like and share. Please like and share. Dave Dowling, you said David Swanson deserves to be a candidate for every voter's freedom to vote on everything government wants to do until it is. Amen. But you've got people who can be outside of the government and make it work. What we have to do, and we have to do what we do on the outside, and then push the people on the inside to do what we sent them there to do. Remember that your elected representatives work for you. They work for you. Somehow or another, when we elect people, we start kissing their rings. It's the craziest thing. It's so perverse. The president is your employee. The White House actually does belong to you. Think about that, everybody, and act like it. And study war no more. Think about that. Think about that. Who works for whom? You don't work for them, they work for you. All right. I love you, everybody. I'll see you tomorrow. And Jewel, thank you. And let me see who was asking about Dr. Deb. Uh, we announced it at the beginning of the show, and we announced it last week. Her daughter had India. That's right. She is a grandma already. Absolutely, everybody. She had the baby. And but I didn't want to put them out there until Dr. Deb gave me permission to do so. She might not want to do that because that's understandable. People have their privacy. But she came in at more than 7 pounds, very, very healthy, and everybody's very, very excited. So of course, are giving Dr. Deb the space to enjoy the time to be with 3 generations in her home. She didn't have that privilege herself. Her mother died very young, as did her father. And so she is she's feeling very, very blessed today. Send her much, much, much love, a lot of positive energy. And I send that to all of you. Thank you for continuing to keep my parents lifted up in prayer. I thank you, thank you, thank you. On behalf of my brothers, my sister, and I, we thank you for that. And just continue to keep them lifted up in prayer. And anyone who is struggling today, keep them lifted up in prayer. We're not the only ones to experience some challenges. Everybody experiences them, and you have to keep on pushing. You have to keep on pushing and keep on praying. Keep on praying. Remember that. Prayer, the prayers of the righteous availeth much. And I thank all of you for all of your prayers, whatever your religious or spiritual commitments, whether you are religious, whether you are spiritual, atheist, agnostic, animist, I don't know. But I thank you for your wonderful energy, all the love that all the love that you've shown us, all the love that you've given us. Thank you so much. We certainly have felt it. Love you so much, everybody. God bless you. See you tomorrow morning on the Santita Jackson Show. David Swanson, I'm sending you much love. Dwight McKee, much love. Marcus, sending you much love. Morning Stars, I love y'all. See you tomorrow. God bless.